Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
This episode is presented by Bakken Backers. After years of block permits and stifling regulations from Joe Biden, President Trump is unlocking America's energy potential.
We have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth.
With executive orders for drilling and pipeline investments, just as he did in 2017 for the Dakota Access Pipeline.
And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it.
This is the moment to secure North Dakota's future, to stop radical outsiders who threaten our state's energy industries, and to grow our energy production, communities, and economy.
It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
Support the Bakken and learn more at backthebakken.org.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, where we're going to be talking about all sorts of things today. In the second half of the show, we're going to have on Dr. Amy Kopis. She is from the, I got to pull up her LinkedIn, the North Dakota Council of Education Leaders. And we're going to talk basically about education policy. I mean, there's some big moves happening at the federal level. And then our current superintendent of public instruction is set to be, she's been nominated. I'm assuming at some point she'll be confirmed to serve in a department that this administration wants to get rid of.
And just cut 50% of their staff. She might have a huge office because there'll be nobody there.
I actually just wrote a column. The headline is, "What a strange time to be Kirsten Basler." So it's anyway, that's you can go read that. But before we get there, we're going to actually be talking with Senator Kristin Roers.
That's Kristen. She's Kirsten. I'm Kristen.
Yeah, that's right. I'm so sorry, Kristen. All right, Senator Kristin Roers, the fastest second in the North Dakota Senate. I almost said the United States Senate. I'm just all over the map today. You are very fast with seconds, though.
Because Senator Klein smacks me if I don't do it fast enough. So
sometimes it's like he's not done making the motion, and you've seconded it. Anyway, pretty amazing stuff. I wanted to talk with you about term limits, but before we get there, I just wanted, I haven't really spoken to anybody from the legislature since an email went out from it's called the Citizens Alliance of North Dakota. They're the local chapter of sort of a national, very mega aligned group, headed by former state representative Brandon Prichard. And it kind of spiked. I had a very visceral reaction to it when I saw it because I just thought it was gross, but it kind of spiked the football, taking credit for Representative TJ Brown, who to be honest, I don't really know much about, and I don't want to make this sound like I'm commenting on him at all. I don't really know anything about him, but, spiking the football, saying that he won a special election to replace Representative Josh Christy, who of course passed away earlier this year. What's the reaction been like in the chamber to that? Because it seemed like he was spiking the football on the man's grave.
yeah, so Josh was my running mate from District 27. Representative Greg Steeman and I had the pleasure of not only being his running mates, but also being his friend. And I had an equally visceral reaction. I spent that Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday with Josh's family at the hospital, at the hotel. Mary is a friend of mine. Josh was a friend of mine. And I honestly just found it disgusting. that it felt like he was trying to dance on his grave or something, trying to take credit for something he had absolutely nothing to do with. It brought some pain to the surface. I know that the family saw it. And that's not fair to them either. Let them grieve. You can be happy in silence. I actually talked to Representative Brown for the first time on Saturday after he had been elected. Well, I'd had one conversation with him before where he asked a question after a legislative forum, but had a chance to sit down with him and his wife on Saturday and just kind of help him get ready for the session. And I asked him, because he had never reached out to Representative Steeman or myself while he was contemplating running, or, kind of put his name out there. And I asked him, was anybody coaching you on this process? Like, were you talking to anyone? And he indicated that he had not been, that he had never met Representative Prichard. So I don't know if they have met since then, and that's when that came about. But my understanding is that they had nothing to do with that election. We'll call it election, quote unquote, with that appointment.
Yeah.
It's an appointment. Yeah. They had nothing to do with that. And so for them to try and take credit is bizarre to me, but also completely tone deaf.
Yeah, and I think it puts Representative Brown in a really tough position, right? Because now I have an opinion of who Representative Brown is, just based on that email, without ever meeting him, without him ever casting a vote. It was just overall just really, really dumb and mean and hurtful to Representative Christy's family, and puts Representative Brown in a tough position. So
it does. I think Representative Brown had put out some talking points of what he stood for. And I would say that it does align more with their philosophies. So I can understand why they thought that this was a win on their behalf, but that still doesn't change the fact that there are human beings involved in this process. There are 3 little girls who don't have a dad. There is a widow who is trying to pick up the pieces for those little girls. And there's no other word for it than tone deaf.
Well, yeah, it was gross, but let's move on. Term limits.
Yay.
A big topic of discussion this legislative session, and rightfully so. I think what the voters approved on the ballot. I don't like term limits in general, but even if you support term limits, I'm not sure that this was the best we could have done. There are 3 proposals still alive before the legislature right now: HCR 3034, SCR 4028. And SCR 4008. And as I'm able to access them, and I know you indicated to me that there's been some amendments to SCR 4008, but as introduced, all 3 essentially do variations on the same thing, which is move our current term limit approved by the voters, which is no more than 8 cumulative years in one chamber. You can go and serve. If you serve 8 years in the House, you can go serve 8 years in the Senate, but no more than 8 cumulative in one Senate. And of course, a term limit for the governor. These essentially for lawmakers push that to 12. And then I believe HCR 3034 also extends the 2-term term limits to other executive branch offices other than the governor.
4028 does. Yep. 4028 does that. I'm not sure what Cast First does. I'll be honest.
That one does as well. Yep,
okay.
It does.
So essentially that's where we're at. But kind of running underneath all of this is another very interesting legal question. When the term limits measure first came out, I argued that this was U.S. term limits, the national group that bankrolled it. This was them wanting to use North Dakota, to start a movement towards, and certainly with the age limits measure as well, which they also backed, to push towards getting the current U.S. Supreme Court to strike down existing precedent. This is very much a play to the judicial branch. And part of the North Dakota part of that is the amendment that voters approved, and I don't think most voters even knew this. It contained a part in there that prevents the legislature from amending that part of the Constitution, which seems in my mind is an interesting constitutional question, because can one part of the Constitution restrain the legislature's constitutional duty to
So my understanding, as not a lawyer, is that concept is, does recency or supremacy play out? So does the most recent thing passed take precedent, or does the original section that says the legislature may does that have supremacy? And so that's the question that we would want the courts to rule on.
Because you should be clear, the term limits measure did not amend the part of the state constitution that outlines the legislature's authority. So that part
Correct.
still in place, still in force.
And during the hearing, I heard from Dustin Gaverlow actually gave himself credit for that particular section of the measure that went on the ballot. So I don't know if that's 100% true, but that was what was shared.
I know that he had started back before the pandemic. I think they had started a ballot measure movement to have that element in it, and then it fizzled during the pandemic. So I know that he's back to that in the past.
Yeah. So I'll kind of start with, 4008, we heard in committee a couple of weeks ago, did some committee work on it, had passed it out with a due pass. And then a few days later, I got 4028 handed to me as a resolution to have to hear it in the state and local government committee. And I was aware of the theory behind 4028. And so it wasn't a surprise to me. So we heard that right before crossover, I think. I'll be honest, it's a blur. Last week, right before crossover, it's somewhere in there. No, it must have been the week before crossover. And then I have to have both of them out of committee by end of day Friday. They have to be passed out of committee by end of day Friday. So we'll make a decision on Thursday or Friday on both of these. So 4008 was introduced by Senator Dwyer, and that one changed it from no more than 8 years to no more than 12 years. I have a philosophical objection to having to switch chambers. I like the Senate. I like being one of 47 and not one of 94. I don't understand why it matters which chamber I'm in. It should matter. If you care about term limits, it should matter about the total amount of time that you're there. So the amendment that I proposed was actually a draft that I had been working on throughout the interim, and was planning on introducing. I had actually was trying to talk Leader Hogue into it because I didn't want it to be about personalities. I didn't want it to be about, is this Casper's or Koppelman's or Roers's or whoever. I wanted it to be, this came from leadership. And so Senator Hogue was willing to do it until he saw that Dwyer had already put one in, and he said, let's just use that as the vehicle. Then now we added a couple more onto the pile. Poor Senator Dwyer has had quite the media campaign against him. The U.S. term limits have been running radio ads all over Bismarck, just absolutely railing on Dwyer. And then I amended my original draft into his bill, and so he's making fun of me that he took all the flack, and I get my way anyway. But the way that I changed it was to say an individual may not serve more than 4 complete 4-year terms as a member of the Legislative Assembly. So what it does is it fixes 2 problems. It fixes when someone's appointed, like Representative Brown or Senator Gerhardt or any of those who were appointed to an unexpired term, whether it be through death or through resignation, et cetera, that term doesn't get counted against them because they weren't elected to it. The other thing it fixes is every 10 years when we do redistricting, there is a group of people who end up with this funky 2-year term. You aren't penalizing them for something that's outside of their control of having that 2-year term. So now it only counts when you serve the full term. So that's what 4008 as amended looks like now. And so you don't have to switch chambers. You don't, and then those partial terms don't count against you, but the total number of terms is still 16, which was the 8 and 8. And so it preserves the intent of the original, what was passed by the people, but changes the mechanics of it, if that makes sense.
So Senator Roers, I mean, I supported, or I opposed term limits. I think that this measure was a bad idea. But the voters did vote. I mean, we can say that the voters didn't understand or whatever, but the folks who were running the campaign to oppose this thing lost. And I think part of the reason they lost is it was often led by legislators. Then the public was like, well, yeah, legislators, of course, they don't like this idea. What would you say to people who are looking at...
Sorry to interrupt. Let's not forget it's a little fluky, too. Initially, this was kept off the ballot because of some deep concerns about the method in which the signatures were gathered for it, which I don't think the court resolved at all. The court basically decided that the Secretary of State didn't have the authority to enforce it, but the timeline for arguing it qualified for the ballot very late because of the courts.
Frankly, if the SOS and AG hadn't thrown out the signatures and you would have had a longer campaign, I think it would have been defeated. But because of those things, it shortened the campaign and made it more difficult. With that being said, the people did vote. It was on the ballot. they voted for this thing. What do you say to the people who are watching this process now and say, well, of course, Senator Roers, this is just sour grapes. You don't like, you like your cushy seat there in the state Senate.
Where I
Which, by
lose
the way, I
50%
heard
of
you
my pay
reference
every day.
it being like maternity leave.
All of the labor, but no baby at the end.
Yeah. So what would you say to those people who are just saying that legislators, they lost, now they have the power to try to turn back the will of the people?
Yeah. I would say, I'll back up to just talking about the process. I kind of joked every time I saw a legislator come out against term limits. I just like shook my head and said, we are the worst messengers on this.
Yep.
We have to find somebody else with this message. And I joked that we should have created a Facebook group that said lobbyists and bureaucrats for term limits. And that would have been the most effective way to be, have who would really benefit from this passing. And it wouldn't be the legislators. I've heard you guys talk ad nauseum about the actual turnover in the legislature is as fast or faster than term limits are going to require it to be. I am not trying to overturn the will of the people. If that's what they want, that's what they can vote for or against. Absolutely. I think there were some mechanics in the original bill that were the biggest problem. And so that's why especially with 4008, I changed it to the 16 years instead of 8 and 8. Because then it's still the same amount of years that the people voted for. We're 12 and 12. Now suddenly you're going from 16 years to 24 years. That is different. And I think a little bit more of an affront to what was voted on by the people. 4028, we had the hearing. We haven't looked at amendments yet. I have one drafted that will kind of do the same thing. Some interesting little dynamics about the differences between the two. 4008 is a direct amendment of what was voted for. If you look at 4028, it's actually creating a new section to the Constitution, a new article, an Article 16. So it doesn't amend subsection 1 that the first term limits measure does. So it's some legal trickery is what I keep calling it. We'll see in the courts which one happens. You guys have talked a little bit about my interaction with the people from U.S. term limits, both on 4008, and they were there on some congressional term limit resolution of Senator Magram's. Every person that I've met from the U.S. term limits has been an interesting character. I've met them at some national conferences. The first person I met, I got in his face a little bit. I was like, what you did was horrible, blah, 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 whatever. And he said, no, we don't do state term limits. And I said, yes, you do. And he said, no, we don't. And I said, go look it up.
That's
so
weird.
That night he looked it up and he came back the next morning and he said, we should have never done that. I was like, then undo it, which is not possible, obviously. But he, I've heard some stories about why they did it. I don't have any proof that that's true, but it sounds like there were some sour grapes involved on that side of it. But it's just an interesting dynamic. Just that they've spent over $600,000 in our state. I don't know how much of it was on the measure, how much of it was paying now Representative Hendricks for his part in getting that measure passed. I don't know how much of it has been on the advertising against Senator Dwyer in the last couple of weeks, but they are dug in, that's for sure.
And just so listeners understand, if you guys pass something, it still goes to the ballot for people to vote on it.
And that's kind of my intent is let's give them something that is still term limits, that is similar enough to what they passed the first time, but fixes some mechanics that it would have been better had they been addressed up front.
It's the political dynamics around this are always so weird. I mean, term limits is a sort of a populist cause, but it's a limit on who voters can choose at the ballot. I mean, the reason why, and sure, we have some lawmakers in Bismarck even now who have served for decades. That was the will of the people. And it was weird to me to watch that. I wrote about that hearing where you had the back and forth with an attorney for U.S. term limits. It was interesting to watch an attorney from out of state represent a Pennsylvania group lecture and a North Dakota lawmaker on the will of North Dakota voters. But I would point out every person who serves in Bismarck is there at the will of North Dakota voters. So it's a weird dynamic where it's like the voters forget that they also vote for the legislature. I don't know.
And it's interesting because it is really hard to find candidates in North Dakota. Like, as the majority caucus leader, that's part of my job is candidate recruitment, orientation, etc. fundraising, all of that fun stuff. And it is really difficult to find candidates. I mean, just trying to fill Josh's seat. We were with the guy from U.S. Term Limits, not the lawyer from Oregon that they brought in, the first guy that was at the podium. I mentioned, guy, it was raw. Like, Josh had passed away Tuesday evening. We had announced it on the floor Wednesday, and that hearing was Thursday. And it was raw. I was tired. I was overtired. I told people I went from cranky to sassy to itchy. Sorry if you have to bleep that. And I was tired. It was time for crossover, but he had the misfortune of seeing me that day and talking about that issue. And I said, look, my running mate just died, and we are going to have a really hard time finding someone to take his seat. And he was just like, that's ridiculous. You're going to have a ton of people coming out of the woodwork. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We had a couple people reach out and ask questions, and all of them were like, my boss isn't supportive. My family, I can't get away from them right now. Like, all of the things. And, we ended up with one person running. So tell me how we've got people coming out of the woodwork in North Dakota. This just is not the reality we live with, because, like I said, people always say, how does that work with your job? And that's when I use the joke of, I said, I just take a leave of absence. It's like having a maternity leave every other year. You have all of the labor. You just don't get a baby at the end. And for a lot of us, like for me, this is a pay cut to come here.
Well, now also we have another ballot measure that's been approved for circulation that, among other things, and some of their proposals aren't terrible, but among other things, would deny lawmakers benefits like health insurance and things like that. So I'm looking at that thinking the only people who are going to be able to serve are going to be retired people or the independently wealthy, because who else could make the time?
Yeah. I mean, I every time I'm in front of the Fargo-Moorhead Chamber and the business community says, what do we need to do to get legislators who are business friendly, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, look at yourselves. Who are you asking to run for office? Who of your employees are you supporting? And I think until we have more employers that step up and say, I understand the value in this, and then at least then they'd have insurance through that way. But there are a lot of people out here that this is the way they get insurance, and that's not their driving factor for running, but it's what makes it possible.
So I get a big kick out of hearing Republicans talk about how hard it is to recruit candidates. So I want Rob, you to remember this conversation when inevitably at filing deadline in 2026, you criticize Democrats for not filling enough spots because you've got to find like 4 candidates. Democrats have to find like 125 candidates in districts that aren't winnable. So Rob, mark this down and come back and listen to this.
Don't look at me. I'm not in charge of candidate recruitment.
Well, you always criticize Dems for not finding candidates. That's off topic, though.
Okay.
I want to switch gears slightly. I mentioned before we started recording, I just watched the hearing on the efforts to not only defund Prairie Public Radio and TV, but also make it so they can't take federal funds that come through the state and sort of bans the practice moving forward. I'm going to go on record as saying that I love Prairie Public Television because of what it did for my kid. When I think about Xavier Riddle and the Secret Museum, every adult should watch that show because you learn more about history than I ever learned about anywhere else. Molly of Denali, maybe it's going to have to be Molly of McKinley again at some point. But these shows are really great educational. In addition, they provide professional development for teachers as well at no cost to the state or the districts. I thought your pushback on Joran Johnson was very good. I think Joran Johnson saying he's up there standing up for taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer. This is the kind of stuff I want my tax dollars to go to. Can you talk a little bit about that issue and sort of where you see this going?
So it was a very interesting wording in the bill, too. I don't know how much read the actual text of the bill, but it says no government official may provide federal or state funds for the purposes of public broadcasting. And to date, nobody's been able to tell me what is and isn't included in public broadcasting. So does that mean the tornado warning that comes across the radio and the TV on any channel, is that public broadcasting? There are so many things that could be a part of that.
Official notices we put out to let people know, hey, sign up for your property tax credit.
Right? Like the PSAs that's got to be public broadcasting, right?
I don't think it's defined in law. That was a really interesting thing is everybody's saying, well, this is about defunding Prairie Public. Well, if you wanted to fund Prairie Public, then you go to the Commerce Department budget and you zero out that line item, which I believe is currently zero.
Right. They're already working on that. And so you don't need this policy, because here's another side effect, unintended consequence is the Siren network, the state interoperable radio network, which is how our fire and police and emergency services all can talk to each other on one radio network. They use one of Prairie Public's towers. It's a $1,500 a month rental payment to use that, so that we don't have to build a tower in a place that a tower already exists. We wouldn't be able to pay that lease payment, because that would be state dollars for public broadcasting.
So what is the reason why it's not zeroed out in the budget, right? I mean, if the concern is from supporters of this bill, and I don't think there's that many supporters of this bill, but if the concern is current funding to Prairie Public, why didn't they just try to zero out that appropriations rather than doing this sort of big maybe it's PR.
I have stopped trying to figure out the why of things that happen, especially in the House. But
shot across the chamber. I love it.
Honestly, I that was my first question. Why did you do a policy bill and not an appropriation adjustment? And I think part of it is where can you have influence? If you're not on appropriations, it's hard to get some of those big changes made. And so if you're a policy person, sometimes doing things through policy might seem like the easiest path. But I think also there was some of it that was you'd have to repeal the law where you could just put the money back in appropriations in 2 years. I think there's a piece of it that makes it feel a little more permanent when you do it through policy. I don't agree with it, but I think that's my guess at the rationale.
Well, first of all, I also am a public broadcasting enjoyer, mostly because I like twee British dramas. I'm weird like that. And also, I think, by the way, if I can give a shout out to our friend Dave Thompson, who is a legend.
A national treasure, not just a state treasure.
A legend.
He's so embarrassed by how much people are coming up to him since that hearing. So
yeah, he's a legend in and I consider him a friend. He's a great person. I've always, as somebody who covers North Dakota government.
Yeah. I think the things that will suffer the most, I don't know that the national programming that comes straight through from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Right.
I don't think that's what goes away. I think what
like
goes away is anything local.
Right.
Dave Thompson, the buses that they take around to schools to provide education so that the schools don't have to buy all those resources, et cetera. And so all you're doing is hurting North Dakota kids, I'll be honest, and adults. But
yeah, so will you work on that bill this week, you think?
It's going to depend. Honestly, I have 52 or 53 bills in my committee, in a B committee. So I have half the number of days that the next highest committee has. So Judiciary is the only committee that has more bills than I do. So it's just a matter of timing. The resolutions I have to get out, but that's my next priority, is that one.
Senator Roers, another thing that Rob recently reported about was a campaign finance bill that came through your committee, the Cleary bill, which I think flew through the Senate.
Yep.
And
I don't think there were any votes against it in the Senate.
And it seems like a really straightforward sort of let's treat legislators the same way statewide. Are you surprised by the pushback?
Yeah, I was a little surprised, but I think that there's a piece of it that, the Senate State and Local Government Committee essentially hoghoused the bill. We kept Senator Cleary's intent, but language-wise, I realized that when you have a section of code that's been amended so many times, it stops making sense.
Right.
So I actually asked the Secretary of State's office, I'm like, taking everything intent-wise that is what we've talked about, can you just rewrite the bill? Like, start with a blank piece of paper. So then what was handed to House GVA looked like a hog house to them, even though not a lot of it is actually different or new. It was very difficult for them to discern what was different or new. So we're working on kind of creating a document where we highlight what's actually different and new. And then the rest, even though it's underlined, so it looks like it's new, they can say, okay, this is just copied and pasted from the old code. And so I think hopefully that will help. I think, a couple of them said they wanted to talk to Representative Lauser because he was involved in the original drafting of creating of the expenditure categories. I struggle with categories. So as the majority caucus leader, I have to do the campaign finance for our caucus. I don't know that I've ever chosen a category other than operations for that because I don't know what else to call it. And
because you're mostly just kicking contributions to candidates.
Yep, and then
or
buying food and paying for fundraiser stuff and, like golf and, whatever it is that we have for our big fundraisers that we do as a full caucus. And so it doesn't tell you anything about what I actually spent money on. And so I ran into him in the hallway and we started that conversation. So I think we'll be able to find some middle ground. And my biggest problem is that when you get a new piece of software and you need to set what the programming is, if we don't change what's currently in code, we're going to have garbage in, garbage out. We're going to have the same crap we had in the old system. It just might be slightly easier to find and slightly easier to enter, but you're not going to have any more transparency. You're not going to have any more information available to the public. And so I want us to do it right with the software. So we'll work on that and hopefully we can get it in a format that they can live with.
I cannot.
Yeah.
Speaking for the news media, I cannot tell you how delighted I am that we're getting a new campaign finance because I get suckered in like the whole cumulative. I can't.
You have no idea how hard it is. You have no idea how hard it is to enter it too. Like it is just ridiculous.
Well, and I'm thinking if we can make that easier. We live in a digital age.
I know.
Frankly, I don't understand why we can't just do a report every 2 weeks, every penny in, every penny out, every 2 weeks. What's the problem?
Whoa, pump the brakes on the every 2 weeks.
I know.
Stuff.
I know. Like some of us have day jobs too. Remember that. Yeah. So I don't just sit there at my computer.
My day job a lot more interesting if I could have more.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
That I think Representative Vetter does have a point. I mean, if you're reporting every 2 weeks, he was concerned about people knowing his strategery. So if you have to do it every 2 weeks, they might.
If you can't figure out my strategery from my actual campaign, then maybe I'm being too obtuse on my.
What strategy? What strategy? Oh, he's running some radio ads,
right, like.
Very innovative.
And then I jokingly said to someone on the committee afterward, because they were talking about buying alcohol. And I said, so you buy it at Costco or Cashwise instead of Happy Harry's. Then you don't have to say what it was for.
Yeah. And here's the deal. Voters aren't going to care if you're buying alcohol for an event. I mean, I think there's some expectation.
I feel like the voters know when you go to a fundraiser, some people might be drinking a glass of wine. It's been known to happen.
I know. It is what it is. So yes,
well, it's interesting stuff. Senator Roers, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and I got to tell you, I am really interested in this term limits because it's going to end up in the courts.
I think it will.
I'm assuming you guys are going to pass one of these.
I would agree. I don't think we'll pass out both over to the House. I think we'll pass one.
And by the way, could we approve that getting the amendments publicly available faster?
I thought that they would have been because we made the motion for a due pass. But first, I didn't realize that because I haven't signed the bill, it doesn't show up.
Hard. When I write about these bills, I have to check with it. Like, were there any amendments to this, or is when I'm seeing everything?
Yeah, I thought that they should have uploaded it as testimony, though. That might be where you want to look when there's amendments. So just something to keep an eye out for.
If I can complain about one other thing, there's been several times that reporters have put on fiscal notes into stories where they've looked at an amended version of a bill that didn't pass, the amendment didn't pass. And so they're looking at the second potential engrossment, but it's not the actual amendment that passed. And so I think there's lots of confusion there sometimes as well. But other than that, Ledge Council killing it.
Yeah, there's been so many improvements. Like today I signed into our computer system called Laws, and there was already an upgrade there. And some people are like, I don't like change. And I'm like, but this one's a good one. So.
And I'll just say I was driving by the Capitol last night going to something at about 7:00, and I saw several Ledge Council staff just leaving the Capitol. So they're working their tails off.
They do. They absolutely work so hard.
Our legislative website, I mean, the video is fantastic. Being able to look up the bills is fantastic. Being able to see, if you haven't been on the legislative website, you can actually pull up a bill. You could click right through to every time that bill's been discussed and watch the video in committee, on the floor. It's broken.
We're one of the only states who has that. I talked to other states and they're mortified. They're like, oh my God, I don't want all that on TV. I'm like, but imagine if you were an external person needing to do research, you have it all there at your fingertips. One other thing to look at, if you guys haven't, the Legislative Council has a Facebook page for the first time, or I don't know, maybe they had it before, but they're doing some really good work there, doing some kind of quick videos with legislators stuff. So it's pretty fun to watch.
Interesting. All right. Thanks, Senator.
Thanks, Senator.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys.
This episode is presented by Bakken Backers. After years of block permits and stifling regulations from Joe Biden, President Trump is unlocking America's energy potential.
We have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth.
With executive orders for drilling and pipeline investments, just as he did in 2017 for the Dakota Access Pipeline.
And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it.
This is the moment to secure North Dakota's future, to stop radical outsiders who threaten our state's energy industries, and to grow our energy production, communities, and economy.
It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
Support the Bakken and learn more at backthebakken.org.
So Rob is letting me do the transition from the first interview to the second interview. This is a big day. I feel like I'm a grown-up here, but what's that?
Took off the training wheels.
Yeah, I think this is Rob's way of saying that he's going to go on vacation pretty soon, and so I'm going to have to roll solo on this thing. But good interview with Senator Roers. I think that, talking about term limits and some of the other stuff she's dealing with campaign elections were super interesting. But our next guest is Dr. Amy Kopis, who is the Executive Director of the North Dakota Council of Education Leaders, which represents administrators, including superintendents, principals, business managers, and all kinds of folks around public schools. And we are going to talk about what's going on with the legislature and what's going on in our public schools. Welcome, Dr. Kopis.
Thank you so much. And please just call me Amy. I appreciate the doctor, but it's not necessary.
So, Amy, first of all, I want some feedback as a professional educator. How did I do with that sort of introduction? And
you did fantastic. I think you're running up to try to take Rob's job.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Rob, that's enough from you. We don't need anything else from you. Dr. Kopis, I feel like, I always use doctor and I always use senator, or I try to use those things. So I'm going to go Amy here. We just had some national test scores come out, and North Dakota, frankly, tested exceptionally well. The NAEP scores. Can you talk a little bit about how our schools are doing and what those scores sort of tell us about our public schools?
Yes, I absolutely can. So we had some really great scores come out in the 2024 NAEP scores. So in 4th grade and in 8th grade mathematics, we were second in the nation. And then in reading scores, North Dakota came out, and I apologize, I might have them backwards, is 7th and 12th, respectively. It could have been 4th or 8th grade. I don't remember which one was which. I think that 4th grade was 7th place and 8th grade was 12th place. But either way, exceptionally well. Really proud of our kids in mathematics. That's awesome. When you take that up and you can run the NAEP, and there are crosswalks over to some of the global ones like other countries do. And those scores mathematically put us on par with some of the best scores globally, with Asian countries, which is super fantastic. And then from a reading perspective, those scores put us on par with countries like Finland and Canada and things like that. So, really the narrative about our public schools not doing well is a bit of a fallacy when it comes to what's going on truly in North Dakota. That might be more of a national narrative. This really fleshes out that at least in those two subject matter areas, we're doing well. And I think it's worth noting the last time we tested in science, North Dakota was second in the nation in science as well. Although that test hasn't been done in a bit. I think it was 2018 was the last time.
Amy, we've got some, there's some upheaval right now in the education sphere, because at the national level, I think the percentage is like 47% of the staff at the Department of Education has been cut, let go in various ways. Mm-hmm. I think it's sometimes hard for the average voter to understand the interplay between the federal government and how that shows up in our public schools, like the local elementary school or high school or what have you. What sort of an impact are North Dakota's education leaders bracing for from that? Or does anybody even know yet?
At this point in time, we've been just really recommending to our folks it's business as usual. The federal government and the Department of Ed is much more of a compliance factor than they are an assistive factor in our public schools. And so we're just moving forward as normal. There's more fear about funding shortages than there really are about other pieces. As of yet, we haven't seen any of those funding shortages come to pass because a lot of those things take congressional action. So we're watching E-rate really closely. That very tremendously directly impacts our technology funding. And that's really important because we use that to impact technology, especially in our high poverty areas, and to make sure that our kids have connectivity like on the reservation and stuff. So losing E-rate funding would be a really big hit to North Dakota. We're watching that closely and hoping we don't see cuts there. Obviously, we're watching IDEA, and that's what helps out some of our kids with disabilities. We don't want to see cuts to that either because we already see where we're short funding in North Dakota there. So we're only funded about 35% for our special ed, and that's backfilled a little bit by the federal government. So, watching those things, so less of an assist to our schools as far as helping out our teachers directly, but really a lot more of a funding fear that's everybody's paying attention to. But we've been telling everybody business as usual for now, because we feel like we have protection with Congress. Woo. Finger crossed.
Amy, do you feel like the state is prepared? I mean, if we do experience cuts in IDEA, I just saw the USDA made some cuts to school nutrition programs of money coming in. Do you think the state is prepared to sort of backfill if we do lose federal funding that we count on for E-rate, for IDEA, for potentially title programs, all those kind of things? And I ask that because I'm a little nervous, not just about schools, but it just feels like the legislature is sort of ignoring the potential chaos coming from Washington in a state that is very dependent on federal funds, not only for schools, but transportation, human services, and those kind of things. Do you feel like legislators are getting it?
No, absolutely not. That is not a narrative. I live in almost every committee. We track 184 bills. Because schools are really entrenched in a lot of different areas. We're very active in the property tax discussion because typically property tax relief happens through the school funding formula. In fact, we were actively involved in 1168 yesterday and supporting that bill, which Representative Lauser's property tax bill. And you're not hearing that conversation. You're not hearing that conversation really in any committee at this point in time right now. So if we see those pieces, no, that is not a part of the budgetary conversation, I believe, anywhere right now. And I've sat in a lot of the appropriation sections, and that's not sitting in anybody's budget as a preparedness for that. So that would end up probably having to go to the Emergency Commission side if we get there. I'm really hopeful that the Moody's report, I think that's supposed to come out tomorrow,
Yep.
is good. We're going to need it to in the event that there are cuts. That's worrisome. Also worrisome in my mind. I don't know that it's going to happen this way, but we've seen it happen in the past when there's been cuts at the federal level, is that impact aid dollars are slow to come. And our Native American schools count on them. And so do our Air Force Base schools. So we've seen years in the past where they could be like up to 2 years behind with impact aid payments. So that we could see that happen again, and that is directly impactful to those schools. And when we look at already, we saw a Title I formula change come from the Department of Public Instruction, which heavily impacted a lot of our Native American schools. So I know they are very nervous right now because Belcourt, for example, is expecting $1.6 million less in Title I funds. So if they have that and they get doubled down with being late with impact aid dollars, that's going to be tough on them. So we just need to watch really closely.
So give us, and again, I think when we're talking about millions of dollars, it's hard to keep track of the scale.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us don't deal with money at that scale in our day-to-day lives. If the legislature had to step in and replace some of these dollars, and understanding it's such a chaotic situation, we don't know what is going to need to be replaced, if anything. But I mean, what kind of a scale would we be looking at? Is it hundreds of millions of dollars, or what is it?
Yep. Honestly, the last time I asked Adam Tesher how much we got in, and I don't know, Chad, if you've asked lately in federal funds, but I bet the last time I asked was when honestly, Dr. Becker when he was still in the legislature, he had a school choice bill. And for some reason or another, I asked Adam how much. And at that time, it was like $600 million coming in from the feds. I just haven't asked in a while. So it's a lot of money, a lot of money. That's where we're talking about being in an appropriation for property tax relief. We're akin to those kind of dollars. So it's quite a bit. Now, I wouldn't anticipate we'd lose them all, certainly, but we need to be cognizant of what we could be losing. And, we just need to be, I look at already we struggle with kids being able to afford their lunch bills. We've seen that happen a lot in our schools, and we were unsuccessful with the bill with regard to getting those lunches taken care of for our students. And I'm always aware that our poverty kids struggle the most. When we talk about kids that are unsuccessful in school, they're absolutely 100% always the kids that are in poverty. That's what 100%
So, Amy,
every time.
Amy, I think public schools are sort of in a weird position in the legislature because on one hand, you have legislators who are saying we've got to do everything different because we're not doing enough innovation in our public schools. And on the other hand, you have folks that are saying we're doing too much stuff different. Let's get it back to the 1950s where it's just the 3 R's, that type of thing. And we heard that from Representative Kempenek. So thinking about, one of my frustrations is when I hear legislators saying our schools are the same as they've always been. There's no innovation going on. I often say nobody can tell the story of innovation in North Dakota better than Amy Kopis. So can you talk a little bit about what's happening around the state in terms of public schools not being the public school I went to, but instead really looking at creating kids that are ready to be great citizens?
Oh, heck yeah. It was when Governor Burgum first came into office, about 8 years ago, he wanted to see some dynamic change in our schools. And our schools were already kind of getting on pace. You saw Bismarck building the Career Academy under the vision of Dale Haroff. And you saw our teachers and stuff really trying to innovate and do some different things. But there was a big propulsion of innovation over the last 10 years. And so he reached out and we partnered with the governor and built, with the help of David Flowers out of West Fargo, and we brought in an expert out of the University of Iowa, and we built what was called the Innovation Academy. And we really were thoughtful and selected the first, I think it was 10 or 12 districts to come in, and we trained them on what we call the 4 shifts of change. And it was essentially how to teach schools how to change and innovate and how to do it correctly, how to do it quickly, how to sell your community on it, and how to actually implement it. So it's not just a conversation, it's actually something you do and it works, right? And how to figure out what's not working and fix it. And out of that have come some of the neatest things that we've seen in North Dakota. And a lot of people don't even know that they're going on. So out of that has come, for example, the JAG Academy in Northern Cass, which has been the shining star of personalized learning in North Dakota. Out of it has come the FlexMod model of innovation, which is Legacy and Oaks, where they have an entirely different look at what a school day looks like so that kids can spend less time in the classes that they are just acing. So like if you're an awesome student in English, you don't spend as much time in English and you can walk right out of the classroom and go walk into the class you're struggling in and spend a significant amount of time there. And it's a flexible schedule, so you spend time in the classes you need to. Or maybe we're talking about going to Dickinson, where they're actually graduating kids with a dental assistant degree before they even graduate with high school. Or they have kids in their CTE center that are finishing high school ready to go out as being a diesel mechanic, and they're doing apprenticeships inside of the community, meeting the needs of their Western Dakota job needs while they're in school. Or maybe we're talking about Empower Ed right here in Bismarck, where we've got kids that were typically dropouts, where regular school in North Dakota wasn't working for them. And we re-engaged them in a new model where instead of dropping out, they're working in a career field where they love it. Like, let's say that they're working in carpentry and they're learning every single standard to become a college graduate while they're working. And they're tag teaming with business and industry and teachers to do it in a completely different way. I mean, I just gave you a couple examples. It's in large school and small school, and it's happening everywhere. Over the course of time, we've trained almost 80 schools, and they keep coming back because they're doing different things from elementary to high school. I sent out a spreadsheet to the legislature that highlighted what all kinds of different things that the schools are doing. Really, we have all these new CTE centers, both brick and mortar and virtual, all over the state. They're essentially like little charter schools all over the place. We have schools within schools going on where we have personalized learning. We have opportunities for kids to do unique and different things. We have a student in Mandan that's actually out doing an electrician apprenticeship right now in Dickinson while he's earning his degree in Mandan, doing everything because they have an awesome LMS system and he can do it virtually. So the world that we grew up in, going to school where it was like sitting in your desk, sit and get, that does not exist in our schools anymore, which is, I think, why, to wrap back to the first part of our conversation, our kids are becoming outlandishly successful because the environment of school that they're in, they like it. And they're learning the way that they learn best. They're engaging in a personalized learning environment where it's not just the same old learning we did. They're learning the way they learn best. And if that's not learning for them, they try a different way. So it's really neat. It is vastly different. The teaching methodologies are different. I just went in yesterday for my youngest daughter, Lizzie. She's 8. She's a second grader. She had her parent-teacher conference yesterday. And they were going over how they were teaching multiplication to her. And she was telling me how they were doing it. Lizzie was telling me. And I have no idea how the heck she is learning multiplication. I have no idea at all because they're teaching it differently. But that kid is doing awesome, 8 years old. And she's multiplying already three numbers times 3 numbers as an 8-year-old in second grade. That's awesome. No wonder by the time she's in 4th grade, she's going to be rocking it all on her NAEP scores. That's the kind of stuff our teachers are doing in North Dakota. It's just tremendous.
I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the school choice legislation, specifically education savings accounts. And I've always, one thing, people who argue for school choice in North Dakota, I think one tactical mistake they make is that they begin the argument by sort of raining on the parade of our existing education system. They cast it as, we need to give parents an opportunity to opt out of failing schools or schools that aren't doing so well. And I think that's the wrong tactic. I think we need to look at it as, well, how I look at it as enabling further innovation from the parent side, where we can allow them to make some even more choices that offers even more flexibility than perhaps our schools already have. But what's your reaction to the education, specifically Senator Michelle Axman's bill? What is it, Chad? Is it
2,400?
2,400. Specifically her bill, which has an education savings account, which I think is great, that you could use for all sorts of things. But then specifically for parents that send their kids to private schools, there's a whole lot more money available there for tuition. What are your thoughts on that?
So my personal thought on it has been a couple different things. The first thing being is that I've always viewed that the best education savings account is one where there's equal opportunity to savings accounts for all students. And it really doesn't matter where you attend, if you're in a public or a private school. So different amounts kind of makes me feel really icky. We've had equity lawsuits in this state all over the place all the time. And this feels like one just waiting to happen. The other piece to it is I fundamentally question the constitutionality still of utilizing public funds toward private education in North Dakota. I know that there's a lot of lawsuits out there. There's a lot of precedent, and people talk about the Montana case or the Maine case. But every single one of those Supreme Court decisions had vastly different scenarios going on in their state that created that ruling. And in actuality, our state is far more similar to what just happened in South Carolina, where they had their ESA overturned and was said that these private school tuition part may not be utilized with the public dollars.
What's the constitutional question in North Dakota? Like what specifically?
It goes back to the section of our Constitution that says that no dollars utilized for public education may be used for sectarian use. And that wraps back to our private schools in North Dakota. So before we even got started with this, I sat down with Senator Axman and I said, we could have this ESA completely get rid of the argument with everybody. And she's kind of looked at me funny. And I said, every family in North Dakota could be supported by this if we went to an equal ESA. Let's say it was $1,000 a kid or $500 a kid, and keep all the allowable uses and just take out private school tuition. The budgetary support for every family would be exactly the same. It would support every family exactly the same. And who cares what the allowable use was? It'll get used up. You saw the list of allowable uses. I mean, every family could use far more than whatever that allowable use was. And if you took that one item off the table, I think everyone would stop arguing and everybody could be happy in the sandbox together.
So you would say no tuition at all, no private tuition at all.
But private school families could use it toward lunch, use it toward all those other things. They'd burn through that money like that.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I support the idea. I will tell you, I hate the sectarian language in our Constitution.
It's there.
I mean, the roots of it are anti-Catholic. It's frankly bigotry, and I say that I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm an atheist, so I don't really have. I'm not here to defend religion at all, but I think it's a really unfortunate language, and sometimes it frustrates me a little bit when opponents of school choice, I'm not necessarily talking about you, but hang their hats on that because it has a very ugly background.
It does. You know, I took North Dakota history from Mike McCormick at BSC many years ago because I'm old. But he wraps back to that, and you're absolutely right about that. But it is what our Constitution says, and I'm not arguing that point per se. I also disagree with public dollars being used for non-public tuition. Period. And here's one of the bigger reasons why, and it has to do with accountability, and it has to do with real school choice, because it's not the parent's choice. Because if you're a parent that has a student with disabilities or a parent with a student with kids with behavioral issues, but you want to attend a non-public school, you may not be able to because they might not accept you. They might not allow you to stay if your kid has behaviors. They might, but they might not. They don't have to. And furthermore, they don't have to follow all the same rules that public schools do. So my thought process has always been is in High School Activities Association, I'm a former varsity basketball coach. When we step on the court, we all follow the same rules. Doesn't matter if you're public or private, if you're at St. Mary's or if you're at Mandan, right? We all follow the same rules on the court. So if we're going to get public dollars for private education, you should follow the same rules. We're on the same court. So that's my stance on that. And I know I've talked about that too.
Private schools are accredited in North Dakota, though.
They're approved. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
I think so. And again, just talking as a parent, and by the way, I love our public schools in Minot, which is where my kids go. And I'm a product of the Minot public school system.
North or Magic City campus.
Yeah. I think we do a fantastic job. Sometimes though, I feel like people who work professionally in the education system have a hard time with giving parents too much leeway, or they want everything to be done through this system, and protecting that system becomes more important, singular, than everything else. I typically gripe about this in the context of how we do school calendars, which a lot of times seem written to what's convenient for educators and maybe not so much for parents. I think sometimes there's a little bit of myopia there. I wish that side of the debate would open up a little bit.
So, yeah, Rob, I think that that's an okay criticism, but I think in this conversation around ESAs, I think the education stakeholder groups have come a long way in terms of supporting ESAs as long as everybody's treated the same and this one use is not allowed. And I think Amy brings up a good point. People are going to use the $500 or $1,000 on something, even if tuition isn't allowed.
So in your guys' like if just throwing this out here, if we had ESAs available and say one of the available uses is school lunch, could you use it to pay the lunch bill at your private school?
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? 100%.
Or if a private school said, well, there's a lab fee if you're taking a science class, or there's a computer technology fee or whatever, you could pay all that as well.
100%. It's not tuition.
Yeah. Amy, I'm going to switch gears slightly because I think this is the one thing that we're not talking enough about as a state, and that's funding for K through 12.
Oh, yes.
Right now, the appropriations is a 2% increase each year, which is about half of CPI, which is going to be problematic for our districts. You mentioned the Moody's report that's coming out tomorrow. I think that there is some indication that 3-3 is possible, or maybe even a little higher than that. If we end up at 2-2, I assume that you're going to have some members who are fighting with my members come May when we're talking about contracts. But what does that look like, the 2-2 for school
Can you be
districts?
clear, what Chad's talking about 2-2, 3-3, that's the percentage increase per year of the biennium.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to provide you guys with a couple statistics, because I think people have this interesting idea that public schools have just had this large amount of money funneled into the system and that we're just wallowing in dollars. That again is a huge fallacy. So in 2013, when the new funding formula started, that's 12 years ago, since that time to now, the average increase on a per pupil basis per year is only 1.85%. And that has translated in the last 10 years to teacher salaries only going up 1.68% per year. That's pathetic. I mean, and we wonder why teachers don't stay in the profession. I didn't stay as a teacher for that very reason. It stinks to not get paid well. And it's when food costs have gone up, gas costs, that's just not enough. So when I know for a fact that the turn back for K-12 education was $58 million this last year, and I know for a fact that enough money's coming in from the Common Schools Trust Fund to pay for a 4 and a 4, and we're at a 2 and a 2, and everybody and the general fund expenditure on K-12 education is less than it was last year. And every legislator is saying that ESAs is not coming from public school money. I don't know how that is. Those things do not correlate. And then I hear that higher ed might get a 4 and a 4. If we end up at a 2 and a 2, it's just fundamentally wrong. And then when I hear leaders on the floor say during the lunch bill that our priority is property tax relief, and it is. You know, I'm the Republican district chair for 30, and I fought hard with Chad against Measure 4 and with the trust that the legislature would do the right thing. And this leader got up and said, we have to focus on property tax relief, and we cannot fund something new with a cost to continue. I believe that same argument lives in the world of ESAs right now then maybe this isn't the right session to tackle that, because we have to tackle property tax relief aggressively. I sat in 1168 yesterday, and I'd love to see all 60 mills go. And you go with Lauser's first version of his bill. I don't know if that would happen or not, but
last question. Why I was interested in that. Why Lauser's bill and not I don't want to make Representative Nathy mad and call it the governor's bill. I just about did that. Representative Nathy's bill. Why that one and not the other?
Actually, I don't mind the other either. The property tax caps amendment that he presented yesterday is far better. So I've been trying to work with Representative Nathy. There's language in the cap side of his bill that doesn't work for schools well and will actually cost the state a tremendous amount of money. So I'm not sure if you're aware, Rob, that 7 years ago, they adjusted the formula to get it so that all the schools were on the formula, because in 2013, they held a lot of schools harmless when they moved us to the new formula. And essentially that meant that some of the smaller schools were getting a larger per pupil payment than others. So they were slowly walking them all onto the formula at 50%.
With the oil boom era, right? Wasn't it like with student
and
growth?
then we had maximums that they weren't able to pull the full 60 mills, and we were getting them on. So as of 2025, we're all on the formula. And it has been a very painful walk. And so the way that the cap side of Representative Nathy's bill is written would reverse all of that work we've done in the last 7 years. But the cap side of Lauser's bill is written correctly. And he also met with the political subdivisions because there's some issues with some of the other caps language, like on how it's written in Representative Nathy's bill would be really not work well with some of the political subs. And we tweaked some of it. So they are all aware that we have to have caps. We have to. And
they have to be strong caps, otherwise we're going to get Measure 4.
We do. They need to be.
And I have this much trust in local governments holding the line of their own militia.
I agree. But his amendments work. Furthermore, I like the 60 mills because years ago, do you remember when they bought out the social services 20 mills off counties?
Yeah.
That took your property tax statement, it dropped it, and that has held property tax relief from that section forever. Because what happens is when you buy out mills, that authorization's gone forever. So you can't backfill it, right? So when they buy out those mills, that's tax relief that works. We know exactly how it works.
It could be backfilled because that property tax bill is made up of a lot of jurisdictions who are certainly aware of what's going on.
Right. But we can't, they don't have those jurisdictions have no authorization on the 60 mills that belong to schools.
Yeah.
So when they're gone, they're gone. And if you cap the other side, they can't grow, right? But, and then on the other side, on Nathan's bill, I just worry that I worry about like our property tax person having our owner, the people that own their home, that they'll forget to go register every year. And the buy down it's a guarantee. I hope both of them pass and that we just get the caps language out of the Louser bill 1168, or they move that caps language over to 1176, however you work that. But I think the caps language works better. And it's smarter for the state. But I hope, honestly, both of them go through because we promised the state property tax relief. And
I have had some conversations with supporters of the Nathan Armstrong, whoever's the author of it, about that K through 12 cap. And I'm starting to see that they get the issues with the way that K through 12 and looking at the Louser bill. So I'm somewhat confident that, I'm with Dr. Kopis. If we can somehow meld these concepts together, make sure we get it right. But Rob, I'm also with you. We can't have caps on our caps because we ain't doing Measure 4 again.
Otherwise, we're going to get a Measure 4. And this time it might be even dumber.
And you've got Becker and Emineth and others I've seen on Beck Television and other places already saying they're ready to collect the signatures.
Well, I don't know if any of you took a look at the testimony for 1168, but Dr. Becker wrote testimony and it's very explicit what he said. He's saying it will come back if the legislature does not deliver to the people what we promised.
With that being said, I don't know that there's anything that's going to be good enough for Dr. Becker.
I think they'll try something regardless. The thing is,
it just won't work if the legislature does something well.
Right. I mean, from 2012, when we had a Measure 2 on the ballot, to 2024, when we had a Measure 4 on the ballot, the percentage of people who voted for it grew. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think we need to worry about satisfying Rick Becker or Gary Emineth or any of them. We need to satisfy those voters who are starting to move over to the yes side on these measures. Those are the people we need to address. And I think if you see their property tax bill, if they see their property tax bill come down $1,000, come down $1,400, whatever the credit is, or whatever we end up doing, if they see a substantial reduction, I think you're going to stop the flow of people to the yes side. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, like, even if you see 30 mills, and that's going to be about 25% of your school side of the property tax statement. And then if you get the credit on top of that, I think people will open up their property tax statement and go, wow, that means something. And in my testimony yesterday, I said, Senator Rummel asked me a question about, how are the people going to know that this happened? And I think our tax statements need to do a better job of reflecting the tax savings that the legislature is providing. They need to show what it would have been without the property tax
I think
relief.
Tax Commissioner Brian Crox's office, I think, calculated it during the Measure 4 debate at like $7 billion cumulative that the legislature has contributed to property tax relief, which is one of the great. That's $7 billion in additional state spending that North Dakota taxpayers are paying for while not getting very much relief on the property tax bills. Okay, we got to put it there. Amy, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I'd come anytime. Take care, guys.
Hey, friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
All right, just finished up our interviews with Senator Kristin Roers and Dr. Amy Kopis. And interesting stuff, Chad, on the education front. I still don't know that I agree with her about excluding tuition from the ESA. I think some of the concerns about the constitutionality and stuff I'm not that worried about them. I mean, that sectarian language does exist. It is problematic. The thing is nothing here precludes the dollars from going to secular private schools. Now, that being said, none exist in North Dakota, but that's not the state of North Dakota.
There actually are a couple, Rob.
That's right. You've told me that before.
There are a couple. I will just say, as a non-attorney, I generally don't practice the game of constitutional or unconstitutional when it comes to these kind of things. I think this is bad policy, but I do think that, having conversations beyond just ESAs, because that is just like one sort of part of everything that's going on in this really, really big, complicated picture of public school funding. I mean, you said it right. I mean, the issues with federal funding into the state, we have no idea. It's the chaos that's the problem of, what's going to be frozen today, what's going to be released tomorrow, what's the budget going to look like, what departments are going to be open. I think it's going to be a bumpy ride, certainly for the first 100 days, maybe it's the first 6 months of this administration, that we need to ride it through. And I worry that if they do some massive, massive federal cuts, the legislature is going to be right back here again, trying to figure out how to deal with those.
Yeah, well, you're right. I feel like no matter what the legislature does during the session, if that happens, we're going to end up back. I don't know what else.
Got to be back.
I mean, it's beyond the scope of what interim committees or like the emergency commission could do constitutionally, especially given some of the Supreme Court rulings in recent years, state Supreme Court rulings in recent years. I mean, they would have to come back in a special session.
Right. And I just think we need to be a little bit careful also with spending. And what are these, how big are these property tax cuts? If we don't know what's happening with it, it's just a very, very difficult time to make thoughtful decisions when there's just so many variables that you have no idea what's going to happen on the federal side of things.
It would be smart if this legislature ended the session with a lot of money in reserve. And I'm not talking about in reserve funds, but like hold back a little bit on some of this stuff because, I mean, and that's not to say we're going to have a lot of money. And I think the Moody's report is probably going to say we have even more money. But there's some wild things happening with commodity, these tariffs with I don't think we know what they're going to do to our economy. And that's the thing we have to remember is when the legislators appropriate, they're spending theoretical money, right? They're and usually they do. I mean, we can do a pretty good job. I mean, during the oil boom years, things got a little tough, but generally we do a pretty good job of predicting how much in sales tax revenue we're going to get, how much in income tax revenue, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't know. I mean, if some of this stuff, I mean, if agriculture tanks, what's that do to our state's economy? And all the other things, suddenly farmers aren't shopping so much, they're not traveling so much. I mean, the ripple effects are potentially enormous. So
right. And again, it's chaos. I mean, and that's trying to figure that out. I think it's going to be interesting with the Moody's report tomorrow. I've been around enough of these reports that the legislature and the appropriator somehow always find the dark clouds in a financial report. I no matter what, they scream poverty coming into these Moody's reports. Yeah. And then all of a sudden there's a lot of money after they leave town. So I hope we don't do that. I hope we're honest with what we think is going to happen from the federals, and we invest in things that we think are important for the state. And I think that includes K through 12.
You usually want us probably to spend a lot more money than I do.
Agreed 100%.
That being said, one consistent criticism I've had is they do budget, and I've had lawmakers just flat out tell me where, well, they kind of, they put in some assumptions into the forecast and then to basically hide money so it doesn't get spent. And that's not conservatism. Nope. I don't think that's conservative. Like, we're just hide it under the mattress because we could use it for things conservatives want, like school choice, or would use it for more tax relief. But we should be honest. At the end of the day, the North Dakota voters, the North Dakota electorate is owed a accurate picture of what their finances are in state government.
Right. And if we have too much money, we're overtaxed if we're not going to invest it in our priorities.
Right. I mean, then once we have an accurate picture, then we can debate. Do we spend it? Do we give it back? What are we going to do? That's the debate, and we can have those debates. But we should all be united around accurate numbers. So I'm very interested in seeing what that forecast is going to say.
You know, Rob, with that being said, I mean, you and I both remember a time when oil prices went negative for a while, not that long ago, and that changes things really, really dramatically. And so when we are so dependent on commodities like oil and ag, with this strange sort of world we're living in, with tariffs, with different policies, with OPEC controlling so many things, we are very much at the whims of things that are completely out of our control.
Trump is talking about drill, baby, drill and all this stuff. The oil people aren't as enthusiastic about that as you might think, because OPEC just committed to keeping their spigot open. So if we're drill, baby, drill in the United States, we're going to flood the market with oil. We're going to overproduce demand. And at least in the short term, prices will tank. That's not necessarily a good thing for North Dakota.
Unless you're driving a car, right? I mean, that's the difficult thing. I always get a kick out of when people in North Dakota complain about gas prices. I think, well, think about what that's doing for tax revenue that will keep your income taxes low and your property taxes low moving forward as we're paying more at the pump.
Speaking of which, I have a column up about Kirsten Baszler and just what a strange time it is. And she's gone. Obviously, she's going, or well, hoping, I don't think she's going to have any problem getting confirmed, but going into a situation where they're going to eliminate the Department of Education. And that's kind of a strange thing. The MAGA crowd in North Dakota doesn't like her. And yet she's going to go to work for the Trump administration. You saw where Senator Kramer had, I think, was kind of adhering to the, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all approach. When her nomination was announced, Senator Kramer didn't have anything to say about it, which I thought was really interesting. But one of the things is, I think Kirsten Baszler was very much a moderate. But when you look at, I went back and kind of looked at like the FTE levels at the Department of Public Instruction. She's reduced the number of,
and she brags about that. She and I have had conversations about, like, during her campaigns when she's bragging about cutting FTEs. I've been critical of her. I'm like, what are you doing, bragging about this? And her response, and it's a good one, she's like, we've cut FTEs, but our employee satisfaction and our turnover is the best in the state. And so when we talk about efficiency, Rob, you've talked about this before. It's not just cutting, it's cutting smartly and making sure you take care of the people you have.
And I think you can argue the Baszler's done that. Also, the DPI budget, understanding that there's a lot of federal money in there, but accounting for inflation, it's down. I mean, I went back and looked, the first DPI budget in 2013 was $2.9 billion in 2025 dollars, or would have been $3 billion. Excuse me, would have been just over $3 billion in 2025 dollars. The budget request the DPI has before the Senate Appropriations Committee right now, or submitted to the Senate Appropriations Committee, was $2.9 billion. So accounting for inflation, her department's budget is down.
But you have to remember, I mean, it's sort of what Dr. Kopitz talked about. There's less general funds going into the per pupil payment. The per pupil payment goes to the DPI budget, and that's a big chunk of that. So, but I want to go back to the FTE piece. I mean, I think what we're talking about, Kirsten, cutting FTEs and having satisfied staff, that's the way to do it, right? What we're seeing at the U.S. Department of Education right now, where they're just chopping 50% of the staff and then figuring out how to do the job later, that's not efficient. That's not a smart way to go about that. I mean, they're going to end up having to rehire people back, or people are going to lose service. This is not thoughtful. DOGE is not a thoughtful way to do this.
Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of fat on the federal bone to cut.
Rob, you and I could go through every agency and probably find some fat that we'd even agree on.
So I'm not against. I mean, if the Trump administration was using this political capital they have right now to make some really tough cuts, because politically, even the fat is very, very tough to get rid of, right, I'd be cheering them on. The problem is I don't want it done stupidly, and I feel like we're doing it stupidly.
Right. It's going to be interesting if Kirsten does get confirmed, and I have no reason to believe she won't. What is she going out to Washington to lead? What is going to be left of that department when she gets out there? I mean, Linda McMahon has made it very clear this is their sort of last hurrah, their last, they're wrapping this thing up. The other thing that's often missed between the administration and maybe voters is he can't just shut down the Department of Education on his own. He can't just cut off all the funding. I mean, Congress does have a role in this stuff.
Well, should have a role. And by the way, Congress should quit rolling over.
Right.
Because the federal government works best when we work it as designed, where the executive branch and the congressional branch and the judicial branch are joint equal branches of government. And there's a lot of Republicans in Congress right now that just want to roll over for whatever Trump wants to do. And that's wrong. I mean, ideologically, it's wrong. And also just from the perspective of how our federal government is supposed to work, it's wrong. All right. I thought the conversation over term limits was very interesting. I really liked what Senator Roers was talking about her amendments to SCR 4008 about basically making it 16 years member chamber. It preserves what voters approved. We just remove a little part of it where it's 8 years in each chamber, which seems a little silly. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me as well, and I would support that amendment. I'm interested to see if there's blowback, because again, it's legislators wanting to change the rules for themselves. But I think what she's talking about there, keeping it 16 years makes that messaging much easier. You're not allowing people to serve any longer. And frankly, it's going to make the chambers work better, that you don't have people flipping back and forth, but it's people with actual experience for a long time there. And I will also say, we've talked about term limits. We have term limits. It's called elections. Bob Martinson is my state representative. Bob Martinson is a great state legislator, and he's been a legislator for about as long as I've been alive, and he's still doing a heck of a job up there. So if people don't like their legislators, vote them out.
And that's true. And you're really old too. So, I mean, that's a long time.
This used to be a dark beard.
Yeah.
Like yours. You must not have enough stress in your life.
No, I got plenty. My hair color is just pretty resilient, I guess. So interesting stuff there. I'm looking forward, and the legal fight over whether or not the legislature is going to be allowed to amend the Constitution. I don't see how that. I would hope that our courts wouldn't uphold that part of it. I think it's absurd. I don't think the like this current legislature, I don't think could pass a law and say we're gonna make this law, and we're also gonna prohibit future legislators
from changing it,
or we're gonna pass a law and we're gonna prohibit the people from being able to refer it. I think that's a stupid precedent to do. If that was Dustin Goverlow's idea, it's a stupid idea. That's terrible. It's unworkable. And
I agree.
I'm looking forward to that hopefully being struck down by our courts.
Yeah.
But that's whatever they come out with is gonna end up, because the legislature, as the Constitution's written now, supposedly is not allowed to amend the Constitution. The legislature is not allowed to legislate, which is a little silly. All right, let's get to some listener feedback. Chris Jones, who had some feedback that we read on a previous show that was a little critical of us, saying that we were focused too much on culture war bills. He writes, "Thank you for the acknowledgement on the show. While it was not my intention, I believe Rob had a better understanding of my intentions. I am relieved and satisfied that he is aware and thoughtful about the matter. That is all I can ask for. I'm also glad that he is contemplative regularly about the appropriate course of action. Creating an enjoyable show is important, and you're doing a great job. I agree that the challenge lies in elevating the show to a deeper level. This is a complex task that I am not competent to solve, but also not my vocation." So, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, so here's what I would say. I mean, nice compliment of you at the beginning. I noticed that I was not listed as somebody who got his comment. Here's the deal. I was somewhat critical of Chris's criticism of us. I will say I think Chris Jones was probably the best secretary or the head of Department of Human Services during my time working with the state government. I think he did a great job of trying to move the ball forward in a nearly impossible job. I think maybe I was a little too defensive about some of his criticism, because I think we do try to dive probably a little bit deeper into stuff than maybe he's looking for, because he does have such a deep understanding of this stuff. So, we try to do more than just the social issues, but this is where we're at.
I think so. When you're on, because we have a beat, right? North Dakota politics, North Dakota government. And you kind of have two choices. You can either go wide or you can go deep. But you can't always do both, because there's just not enough time. And so a lot of times we chose to we pick the things we are important, and we go deep, as opposed to wide. Because if you go wide, then you can't go as deep, and then I think it becomes a little superficial. So, we're doing our best, but our priorities maybe aren't going to be for everybody. Well, if you thought that Chris was being a little bit too congratulatory of me, not you, our other feedback we got from Josh says, Josh in Bismarck says, this message is for Chad. Keep up the good work on no tax money for private schools. As a private school graduate, I 100% agree. And for the record, it's Bishop Ryan, not Minot Ryan. You don't call it Bismarck Shiloh.
Well, Josh, first of all, thank you for the compliments on policy, but now I'm a little confused on what we're supposed to call Bismarck St. Mary's and Fargo Shanley if it's not, so Bishop Ryan in Minot. Can we do that, you think? Bishop Ryan in Minot?
Yeah, because it's it's named after, obviously, a former Catholic bishop.
Yeah. But I appreciate the words from Josh, and we'll try to do better on the name of the private school up in Minot.
I have been corrected on that as well. My sister's kids went to Bishop Ryan, and I would always call it Minot Ryan or Ryan High School or whatever, and they would say, no, it's Bishop Ryan. So do
most people call it Minot Ryan? Like people who aren't connected to Bishop Ryan, do they call it Minot Ryan? Or
I think a lot of times, like in sports, like when they're reporting a Class B sports stuff, they'll call it Minot Ryan because they want to get where it's from.
Yeah.
And then Bishop Ryan's a little long, so I think it gets shortened to Minot Ryan because they want to get the geography in there.
Right.
I think that's where it comes from.
I should mention I was up in Minot on Monday to watch the Ray Jays in their regional basketball tournament there at the Minot Auditorium. Nice facility. Ate a hot dog there. Unfortunately, the Ray Jays lost to Belva, but nice little community you're living at up there, Port.
The Magic City is a pretty nice place to be. Hey, coming up on the next show. Oh, by the way, if you want to leave us feedback, phone number 701-587-3141. Also remember on social media, you can follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. Our handles for the show on all of those are at Plain Talk ND. So any of those, you can follow us, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Coming up on the show, I'm actually really interested because the property tax debate continues to be an interesting one. Senator Paul Thomas reached out, and he wants to provide the sort of farm. He represents an area southeast of Minot, rural area, Velva area, obviously other communities as well. But he wanted to provide sort of the farm agriculture perspective on property tax reform and because I think whatever bill comes out, I think to get those farm country votes, and by the way, they're better organized than they are in the past. They have that new, what are they calling it? They add the Rural Caucus,
right.
Head by Senator Yana Myrdal. They're going to have to get a piece of the pie. They're going to have to get something out of this. I'm concerned that if we try to give too much tax relief, I think this is a valid criticism of the Speaker Robin Wise's property tax bill. You try to dilute the property tax relief that's available across too many people, it turns out to be not that effective of relief. I'm worried about it. We only have so many dollars, to commit to this. So I don't know. I'm interested in what he has to say. He wants to come on. He feels that we haven't been articulating not really a criticism, but he wants to give their perspective because he feels like that's been missing from the debate. Happy to have him on about that and talk about that. So that's going to be an interesting show coming up on Friday.
And J-Bell's here on Friday.
J-Bell sitting in on Friday as well, where we also have Ron Ness is going to be on from the North Dakota Petroleum Council. They just had an announcement on oil's impact and some interesting questions too. Again, we're so dependent on commodity prices, all this turmoil and chaos at the federal level. Oil is one of the most important, oil and gas, one of the most important commodity. They drive a ton, probably more than any other industry. In fact, I know more than any.
Yep.
They drive tax revenues. So it'd be interesting to hear perspective. How much certainty do we have that those revenues are still going to be there over the next 2 years as we try to budget for the next 2 years? So that's all coming up on Friday.
So, Rob, I will just end with one thing. I'm not going to be here on Friday, but the next time you and I are together, the Dodgers will have played 2 regular season games against the Cubs in Tokyo on Tuesday and Wednesday morning. That means spring is here. It's baseball season. What a time to be alive.
I love these foreign games, too.
So do I.
I loved when the Yankees went and played the Red Sox in Great Britain a few years ago. That was a fun, even though the arena that they were playing in, it kind of turned into a racquetball match.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun.
And I think I think these games in Tokyo, when both the Cubs and the Dodgers have Japanese stars, it's gonna be ridiculous. It's gonna be awesome.
Well, and the Asian countries already, I've argued, but for soccer, I think that, and maybe hockey, but baseball is one of the most international sports there is.
Yeah.
And when you look at just the enthusiasm in, Spanish-speaking countries, in Asian countries, it's huge. And I don't know. I love the game so much. It just delights me to see it getting shared with new audiences.
My concern is we're losing enthusiasm in our country for baseball. We got to pick that up again.
Yeah.
We're a football culture these days.
I don't disagree. I don't like football. I don't know what. I can't get into it.
I like football. It's not baseball, but I still like football because I'm an American.
Yeah. What was that? I'm
going to Canada on Friday, so I might be. I look forward to if I get heckled by our Canadian friends.
You might need to work on your accent up there, so you don't.
Hey, I may not have the accent, but I can eat the Canadian food. I can eat some poutine. There's no doubt about that.
Poutine away. All right, we're going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
Rob, that's enough from you. We don't need anything else from you.